Hey everybody, it's Party Elite with another episode of the Magic Guide. This time around we're looking at the Lore of Death, a lore that has been potent since the game first released and remains a powerful one to take to the field of battle with its Augment spell, 2 direct damage spells, 2 Hex spells, and Vortex spell. The Lore of Death is available to multiple lords and heroes across multiple factions with varying costs. Despite that, the value of spells is still the same across the board, so I'll be referencing the value rather than the cost of the spells, though I'm keeping costs in mind for my evaluations. Life Leeching is the lore attribute, and it's one you must take to the field. Increasing your power recharge rate and power reserve is a no-brainer, especially with its minimal costs. Aspect of the Dreadknight costs 4 winds of magic to cast, has a 22-second cooldown, and gives an ally plus 8 leadership, and the ability to cause terror for 14 seconds. Overcast, it costs 9 winds of magic, lasts for 28 seconds, and can affect allies within a range of 40 meters. In theory, Aspect of the Dreadknight is an amazing spell. The ability to make a unit terrifying for a mere 4 winds of magic is absolutely excellent, as it can turn a faltering flank into a broken one, and potentially even result in a mass rout. Unfortunately, most online play is built to counter the imminent threat of fear and terror against the vampire counts, and to a lesser extent, the Warriors of Chaos, making terror absolutely useless if your opponent has immunity to psychology. If you're going in as Azag the Slaughterer though, you might get some use out of it. Remember to cast it only when your opponent is low on morale. If their morale is too high, terror will not kick in, and you've wasted 4 winds of magic. Spirit Leech is an excellent direct damage spell that costs 8 winds of magic to cast, has a 26-second cooldown, and lasts for 13 seconds. Overcasting increases the cast range and costs 11 winds of magic. This is one of the must-have spells if you're going in with the Lore of Death, so much so that people will often call it overpowered. Every 2.5 ticks, it has a 75% chance to hit each individual it might affect in the unit, which is at most 1 individual, with 190 points of damage. This spell is meant to target single entity units to get the best value out of it, so reserve it for enemy leadership, casters, heroes, giants, and the like, and watch them wither away. No matter which faction you're going in as, Spirit Leech is an absolute necessity on the field because you're guaranteed to get use out of it, and it can't be dodged, plus it ignores armor by default. Overcasting is rarely needed as it only increases range, and it does not do any more damage in any way. However, in a desperate situation, don't hesitate to overcast to make sure you can get that damage in nice and early or right at the end of things. Doom and Darkness is a great hex that costs 7 winds to cast, has a cooldown of 43 seconds, and lasts for 36 seconds, causing a negative 16 to leadership to an enemy unit. Overcasting increases the cost to 14 winds and adds a 40-meter area of effect to the spell. This spell can be very handy in breaking your enemy. A negative 16-point drop in leadership is absolutely massive, but its relatively high cost to cast makes it a little prohibitive outside of specific scenarios. If you're planning on bringing a lot of fear and terror to the field, and your opponent isn't likely to counter it with immunity to psychology or unbreakable units, it can make very quick work of an enemy front line, especially when overcast. Unfortunately, as I stated earlier, there is often a fair bit of preparation done against just those approaches if you're playing as the Warriors of Chaos or the Vampire Counts. As fun as it is to cast a spell and send an entire line running, there are actually better places the winds could be used with more guaranteed results. As a result of that, and the usually middling costs, I advise against taking Doom and Darkness to the field, though it isn't a definite leave behind like most Vortex spells. Soulblight is a hex that costs 9 winds of magic to cast, has a 45-second cooldown, and affects a 40-meter range with negative 30 armor and a negative 22% weapon damage for 20 seconds. When overcast, it costs 15 winds to cast and lasts 40 seconds. A fairly good spell, in theory, as it can have a significant impact on enemy armor, and depending on what you target, can heftily reduce damage output as well. If you're planning on taking it to the field, make sure you're not using it to support your armor-piercing units unless it's just to reduce enemy weapon damage. The only reason I advise not to take this, on average, is because for 1 less wind of magic, you can get a regular cast of Spirit Leech out, and that can do more damage, even tactically speaking, as it can help take out enemy magic or leadership, often pulling it down to about half health and making your opponent a bit more hesitant with those units. The Purple Son of Xereus is a Vortex spell that costs 12 winds of magic to cast, lasts for 11 seconds, and has a 53-second cooldown. Overcasting has it lasting 22 seconds with a cost of 17 winds of magic. Hitting a relatively large area with 6 points of damage and 12 points of armor-piercing damage, the spell can do a lot of work if it doesn't veer off into the sunset. With a chance of changing direction up to 170 degrees every second, this vortex spell finds itself among other vortex spells in my book, not worth the cost in wins or points unless you're looking for some entertainment. The Fate of Buna is the other must-have Lore of Death spell. Costing 16 wins of magic to cast, it does direct damage on a targeted unit for 20 seconds. Unlike Spirit Leech, this spell is ideal for targeting units with higher individual counts. Every half second, it can damage a total of 9 entities by 9 points, though it only has a 25% chance of a successful roll against each entity. Thankfully though, it's rolling twice a second for 20 seconds. That is a lot of potential hurt delivered, especially if the dice gods are on your side. Use this spell against high threat enemy units, especially if they're heavily armored. Remember, direct damage ignores armor. Target enemy Demigryph Knights, Royal Pegasus Knights, or units that you'll have a hard time catching up to like Mangy Marauders or Wolf Riders. If you target a unit with less than 9 individuals, you are wasting the spell. For example, if you target a character, there are 8 targets technically missing, and the spell won't just hit the one individual with the remaining 8 strikes. So, there are a few ways of approaching this spell. If you hit a unit with, for easy math, 9 entities, but extremely high HP, you might be able to reduce them all to half health, but keep the entity count about the same for another hit. Or, let's say you're targeting a unit with 90 entities with lower HP each. That damage might spread across all 90 units, or it might concentrate on a handful, killing them, reducing the total entity count, making the spell more potent the next time around. I think it's pretty clear why this is marked as a must-have spell. It can cause a lot of hurt and makes your caster very dangerous, especially when paired with Spirit Leech. The Lore of Death is a hard one to counter. The caster can literally target your lords and heavy-hitting units with direct damage spells to wither them away. Staying safe from Aspect of the Dreadknight and Doom and Darkness involves coming prepared with units that have high leadership or are immune to psychology. Avoiding Soulblight, if it's on the field, is a matter of disengaging units that are afflicted by it, but shutting down Spirit Leech and the Fate of Buna is a bit harder. Outside of bringing a lore of magic that can counter damage, like the lore of vampires' Invocation of Nehek or Earthblood from the lore of life, there are some options on the field that free you up compositionally. First off, you can bring a scroll of Leeching to help reduce enemy magical flow. That will help a bit, but outside of that, you can send less valuable units or units that are capable of regenerating health one way or another in early. This initial aggression might draw Spirit Leech and Fate of Buna casts on these units that can be healed, and then you can push forward with more fragile units, relatively speaking. Since the cooldown on these spells range between roughly half a minute and a full minute, and they can get pretty pricey on wins, you might have enough time to push in, engage lines, and engage the caster to prevent further casts. This is obviously not as surefire an approach as countering with magic, but it certainly is an option. Try to keep an eye on your opponent's army as well. Do they have items or abilities that help strengthen their winds of magic? Try to avoid them if they buff power recharge rates when engaged in melee, for example, or get rid of them nice and early if possible. And that covers the Lore of Death, one of my favorite lores and probably one of the more common lores on the field today. Spirit Leech and the Fate of Buna are very potent spells, especially when used against the right targets. Get rid of enemy leadership and weaken enemy high-tier units to make them hesitant to engage, or try to strike at leadership if you feel the option is there. The lores of magic are just another set of tools on the battlefield. You need to make sure you take the right tools for the job and use them well, because that's what being a great general is about. As always, for more Total War content, including updates to this Magic Guide mini-series, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Have any interesting magic-related thoughts or strategies of your own? Let me know in the comments below.